Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk some Terps with you. Today, I'm going to be diving into Maryland's Friday night matchup with Big Ten newcomer UCLA. But first, a reminder that this show is on YouTube and part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. So if you're listening to this show, but you want to be watching it, you got to go and check out Department of Hoops on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because there are a ton of great shows out there. We're covering the Terps. We're covering the Wizards. We're covering other local college basketball. So if you love local hoops, you got to check out the Department of Hoops. So let's get into this big-time Big Ten matchup between the Terps and the UCLA Bruins. There's no line on this game yet, but Ken Pom projects this as a 72-68 Terps win, and Maryland comes into this game 11-4, 1-3 in the conference. As you well know by now, they lost 2 in a row out in the Pacific Northwest to Washington and Oregon, but they're still number 23 in Ken Pom, and they're still number 23 in the net. Now, UCLA also comes into this game at 11-4, but 2-2 in the conference. They're ranked 28th in Ken Pom, so just behind the Terps, 27th in the net, also just behind the Terps. They still sit at 22 in the AP poll at the moment, but UCLA, like Maryland, is also coming off back-to-back losses. UCLA went to Lincoln, lost to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They come back home, and they get blown out in Pauley Pavilion on Tuesday night, 94-75 by Michigan. And this was a game where Michigan got out to a big lead early. They looked like they were going to run away with this thing. UCLA battled all the way back, and then Michigan pulled away in the end, again, giving up 94 points to a Michigan team that's now undefeated in conference play, and a team that is looking really good, looking like a Big Ten contender to be certain. What a difference a year makes for the Wolverines, with Dusty May now at the helm, coming over from FAU and replacing Juwan Howard. But we're not talking about Michigan today. We're talking about Maryland and UCLA. So UCLA gets blown out at home by the Wolverines. They've lost 2 in a row. They've lost now 3 of 4, dating back to December, where they lost to North Carolina. They have a great win against Gonzaga in the middle, and now they drop back-to-back games against Nebraska and Michigan. And the UCLA headman, Mick Cronin, was not happy after this game. Take a listen to what he had to say in his post-game press conference.
We're too soft to play hard enough even in the crucials, you can't get an offensive rebound. It's like a 5-point game, and Kobe Johnson just has a guy take the ball from him. Same thing with Sebastian Mack. Okay, we finally do get a stop. Can't get a defensive rebound. They didn't have a million of them because they didn't miss that many shots. But there was a few in particular. Kobe, Sebastian, huge, back-breaking. And you got inside position. So don't tell me you want to win. Just don't tell me you want to win. You won't start the game. Tyler Bilodeau gave up 12 points. 2 screens, he didn't say a word, 3s, and then he got dunked on 3 times. So don't tell me you want to win.
So there was the UCLA headman, Mick Cronin, calling out not 1, not 2, but 3 players by name in that rant. He would go on to call out another player at another point in his press conference, and he was not happy about that performance. And there was still more to be said by Cronin, because right after that, a reporter went to ask the next question, and Mick Cronin still had more to say about his team. Take a listen.
You obviously came back and took the lead. Do you feel like ran out of energy?
I have to run on the court to get guys to play hard. It's crazy, and it's every day. I'm tired of it. It's every day. I have the most energy of anybody at practice every day. I'm upset with everybody in that locker room, my assistant coaches and my players. I don't need to do anything else. I almost got 500 wins. I'm only 53. You think I'm coaching the Lakers? It's a joke. It's a joke. But yet I come in and I have more passion and energy and pride than everybody in. That's the problem. It's just that is the truth right now.
So Mick Cronin says it's a joke. I don't think UCLA fans find anything funny right now. I'm not sure those players in the locker room find anything funny right now after being loudly challenged in the media by their head coach. He called out 3 players right there in that first clip. He calls out another player later. He calls the team soft. He says it's a joke. At another point in his press conference, he calls the guys on the team delusional. They were very loudly, vocally, publicly called out by their head coach. Now, I have a few different thoughts on this, but one of the prevailing sentiments coming off of this game by a lot of Maryland fans that I've talked to has been kind of this notion of, oh, great, UCLA, a pretty good team, gets blown out at home, their coach challenges them, and they're going to play their best game of the season. And I kind of get that sentiment. It's kind of a traditional way of thinking of things, is like when a good team loses, you don't want to play them right after because they are going to be motivated, they are going to be focused, and they're going to want to go out and put on a great display. And that's certainly possible, but I think things could go one of 2 ways for UCLA following that, because Mick Cronin better make damn well sure he knows his team, that he knows how his team is going to respond to that kind of challenge, because that feels like the kind of challenge that is better suited to coaching basketball in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s than it is in 2025, than it is in the transfer portal era. And of course, Mick Cronin knows his team way better than I do. He coaches them every day. He's in practice with them every day. I've never met one of them. But it just doesn't feel like the kind of thing that really flies in 2025 when you have so much of the sport transferring year in and year out. When you have guys with the ability to say, he said that about us in the public, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm gone after this season. I think there's certainly a lot of guys out there who respond to being coached hard, who want to be coached hard, that want to be challenged. I'm not sure for every player out there. In fact, I know for every player out there, being challenged publicly like that in the media isn't always the best way to do it. It might work for some guys. It definitely doesn't work for other guys. And Mick Cronin better be sure that his team is the kind of team, his guys are the kind of guys who are going to respond positively to that. Otherwise, there's a chance the season goes completely down the drain for UCLA. So there's that chance. They respond and they play their best game of the season. But there's also a chance that they don't, that they start playing for themselves, that they're just trying to put something good on tape for their next landing spot. I don't know. It really could go either way. Again, of course, Mick Cronin knows his team far better than I possibly could, but I'm just not sure that's the best approach to take, to call your team out publicly in the media that loudly, that aggressively, that vocally in front of the whole world to see in early January, in 2025, when you are in this very different era of college basketball. Now, my second thought on this is, yes, I get it. If you're thinking you're a Maryland fan, you're like, oh, great, we have this motivated UCLA team coming in. But let's flip this thing around for a second. Shouldn't UCLA fans feel exactly the same way about a good Maryland team? Because this is a good Maryland team. This Maryland team has proven they are good. Beating Villanova on a neutral site is a good win. Blowing out Ohio State at home is a good win. Playing Marquette down to the wire, while it is not a win, it shows what this team is capable of. And I bet if you're a UCLA fan right now, you're thinking, oh, great. Maryland dropped 2 in a row. They're coming home. UCLA has to go all the way to the East Coast to play this game. Xfinity Center is one of the best environments in all of college basketball, certainly in the Big Ten. And this isn't fair. This isn't fair for us. We're hosed in this game. Maryland's going to be motivated, coming home, and they're going to blow us out. UCLA's coming off a couple bad games. I feel like that's exactly what UCLA fans are feeling right now. So I don't buy into this notion at all that Maryland can't win this game just because UCLA has lost 2 in a row and because their coach vocally, loudly called them out in front of the whole world to see after that game. I don't think there's any guarantee that UCLA comes out and plays their best game. And even if they do, I think Maryland's best game, I think Maryland should be expected to come out and play their best game as well. And I think if both teams are at their best, Maryland can beat them. if Maryland brings their A game, Maryland can win this game. Maryland is going to be the Vegas favorite in this game. Maryland is favored by KenPom right now by 4 points, projected to win 72-68. So that's kind of my overarching thoughts on the whole notion that these two teams are both coming off losses, that UCLA is going to be extra motivated coming off that tongue lashing by their coach, and we'll see. But I got 3 burning questions about this game that I want to ask that I think are really going to determine who wins it. So number 1, can Maryland's bigs, Julian Reese and Derek Queen, take advantage of an undersized UCLA front line like a bunch of other teams have this season? So UCLA is undersized in the front court. Very often, their tallest player on the court is 6'9" Tyler Bilodeau at the 5. And there is a guy off the bench, 7'3", Ade Mara. He played a little bit against Michigan, but he's not a guy that's starting. He's not a guy that's going to give you 25 minutes in a game. Very often it's 6'8" Eric Daly at the 4 and 6'9" Tyler Bilodeau at the 5. And we've seen teams as recently as earlier this week in Michigan exploit that because Michigan's built a lot like Maryland. They have 2 7-footers in their front court with Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, and both those guys are transfers. Golden came over with Dusty May from FAU. Danny Wolf is a Yale transfer. Both those guys have been very good for the Wolverines so far this season. A huge part of their surprising start to this campaign under May. And of course, Maryland doesn't have 2 7-footers in the front court, but Maryland has 2 very good, very effective bigs in Julian Reese and Derek Queen in the front court. So earlier this week, when Michigan blew out UCLA in Pauley, Vlad Golden had 36.7 boards. Danny Wolf added another 12 points, 8 rebounds. Earlier this season, when UCLA did beat Gonzaga, their best win of the year for sure, Graham Ike, Gonzaga's big, had 24 points, 8 rebounds in the loss. So we've seen high-quality big men able to exploit this UCLA front line. I would expect that Derek Queen, who had a very good game against Oregon, and Julian Reese, who had a very good game against Washington on that road trip, can do the same. I trust this front court as much as I trust any front court in the country, certainly any front court in the Big Ten, and I don't see any reason why they can't do to this front line what they've done to other teams this season and what other teams have done to UCLA this season. Now, I do expect that we're going to certainly see some double teams, but I think that actually bodes very well for Maryland. I really like Derek Queen as a passer. I think that might be one of his most underrated aspects. He's just a guy who can do so many things that it sometimes gets overlooked, but his vision and his passing ability is something that's really impressive. And I think if he does see a double team, it's something that he's going to be able to exploit. So that's burning question number 1. Can Maryland's bigs take advantage of an undersized UCLA frontline? To me, I think the answer will be yes. Question 2 is who can win the turnover battle? Because when the Bruins are at their best, they're a lot like Maryland. They create turnovers and defense leads to offense. UCLA's number 1 in the country, in fact, in defensive turnover percentage. And I talked a lot about Maryland forcing turnovers and their inability to do it against some of the better teams on their schedule so far this year. But Maryland is 27th in the country in the same metric. Both of these teams are very, very good at forcing turnovers. And it's important not just for getting stops, but in the way that it can lead to offense. Because for UCLA, they are a defense-first team. When you look at their KenPom profile, they're number 5 in the country in defensive efficiency, just 78th in offensive efficiency. They are, like always under Mick Cronin, a defense-first team, and they really rely on that defense to lead to a lot of offense. So this is a huge question to me. Who can win this turnover battle? Now, I think where these teams differ and where Maryland has an advantage is that Maryland has been very good at taking care of the ball themselves this season. And I think that's what makes them different than UCLA. Maryland's 15th nationally in offensive turnover percentage. Well, UCLA is 109th. They have a couple guards, like their point guard Dylan Andrews, one of their other guards, Kobe Johnson, who both turn the ball over at significantly higher rates than any of Maryland's starting guards. Much higher than Gillespie, Rice, or Miguel. I think that's advantage Terps there, and I think that's where these teams differ. Now, if Maryland takes care of the ball and doesn't allow UCLA to force turnovers and get out in transition, I think it's going to be very, very hard for this UCLA team to score in the half court. We've seen at times they can really struggle shooting the ball from the outside. In that loss to Nebraska, that was a huge deal for them. I believe they went just 14% from three. Yeah, 14.3% from deep for UCLA in that game. 4 of 28. That is not a good number there. Now, at times, they can hit it, and that's where they've gotten some of their bigger wins. Against Oregon, they go 12 of 23 from deep. Against Gonzaga, they go 12 of 24 from deep, 50%. So there are times when they can hit it, but when they are not hitting, they really struggle, and when they are not turning the ball over and getting easy buckets for themselves, they can really struggle in those half-court sets as well. And then my third and final question, burning question here, that I think will determine this game, is who can bounce back better? Is it Jacoby Gillespie bouncing back from a tough road trip out to the Pacific Northwest? Or is it UCLA's Eric Daly, who suffered a facial injury a few weeks back and is wearing a mask? He missed the Nebraska game, and then he went just 3 of 9 from the floor against Michigan. Which one of those two guys can bounce back better for their team? Because Jacoby Gillespie, he had a tough road trip out in the Pacific Northwest. He had just 1 point in 18 minutes, 3 turnovers to 2 assists against Washington in that loss. And then against Oregon, although he did some really good things, although he scored 16 points, although he hit some big shots, he had some questionable shot selection down the stretch in that game in crunch time. Some questionable decision-making on the defensive end, perhaps. And he missed a big free throw down the stretch. It was a really tough end of the game for Jacoby Gillespie. And he's a guy that I think I'd really like to see him get going early in that game, gain some confidence early, because I love the way that he bounced back from the Washington game against Oregon. But then again, down the stretch, some mistakes, some things that could deplete your confidence if you allow it to. Jacoby Gillespie is as important a part of this team as anybody. I mean, if we're thinking about guys who have to play to their ceiling for this team to go far, he is absolutely right up there. I think he's been a great addition for the Terps this year. But we started to see a moment there where, he was feeling maybe a little bit of growing pains, transferring up from Belmont to the Big Ten. It is different going through this schedule. I like how he responded against Oregon. I thought there were some questionable things down the stretch. I really want to see him get going early in this game to make sure he has confidence and he can keep this thing rolling through the rest of Big Ten play. And then Eric Daly for UCLA, like I said, he was injured. He had a face injury. He's wearing that mask, which can be distracting, but he did drop 18 against Gonzaga in that mask. At times, I mean, he is extremely athletic. He can get to the basket. He did go to the free throw line 9 times against Michigan, but like I said, 3 of 9 from the floor. He's a guy that's critically important for UCLA if they want to get going offensively. I feel the same way for Maryland with Jacoby Gillespie. 2 very different positions. Gillespie, of course, a point guard. Daly really playing more of the 4, but he's a guy that can drive that offense if they allow him to. It's critically important, I think, for both of these guys to get going. Whichever one does is going to give their team a big advantage. So those are my 3 big burning questions for Maryland's Friday night matchup with UCLA. Can Maryland's bigs take advantage of an undersized UCLA front line? Which team can win the turnover battle? And can Jacoby Gillespie bounce back from a rough Pacific Northwest road trip for the Terps, or will Eric Daly bounce back from this face injury, from missing the Nebraska game, from going 3 of 9 from the floor against Michigan for the UCLA Bruins? That's the show for today. Thanks so much for hanging out to me. Hey, I really want this to be an interactive show, so hit me up. I'm all across the internet, all the social media platforms, at the same handle. It's at Gorgon Sports. You can also always drop a comment in the YouTube chat, and make sure you are rating and reviewing this show. Give us 5 stars. It really, really helps things out. Every time you give a like, every time you rate it 5 stars, every time you leave a comment, it really does help the show out. I know I feel like every single other person on the internet asking and begging for you to like and subscribe, but sincerely, it does help the show out. So if you are a fan, if you like what I'm doing here, if you're enjoying this Terps conversation, please go ahead and give a like, give a subscribe, give a 5-star review. That's the show for today. I will be back next week. I'll react to this UCLA game. I'll react to Monday's game against Minnesota. Enjoy the games this weekend, everybody. And until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.